Come on in. Welcome to Idled Out, where we talk all things Survivor. My name is Luke, and today we're talking about bitter juries. Yes, bitter juries, that classic go-to when your personal favorite doesn't win at Final Tribal Council. So-and-so only lost because the jury was bitter, you might say. And you're probably right. Bitter juries are absolutely a thing, but it's also perfectly okay and valid for jurors to feel bitter. Being upset, angry, even vindictive, these are all natural responses to having the Survivor dream ended, and taking into account how you vote someone off and their response to it is something players must take stock of. The human element of Survivor, convincing a bunch of people you had a hand in taking out to vote for you, is a huge part of what makes Survivor so compelling in the first place. I don't know, if you want to watch a bunch of dispassionate robots play a game optimally, watch AI play chess against each other, or Survivor Cambodia. Because Survivor is a game about hurt feelings and ending dreams, all juries have an element of bitterness. It's just a degree of how bitter. Nonetheless, 5 juries stand out to me as the most bitter of all time, who collectively really held the finalists' feet to the fire. So let's find out how and why they were so bitter. Usually salty and bitter don't go together, but not today. We're about to get a whole lot of both. All that said, let's dig in to the most bitter juries in Survivor history. At number 5 is the jury in Survivor Kaôh Rōng. Now, we don't have to rehash the Michelle versus Aubrey debate. Michelle's a great winner, and Aubrey would have been too. But this jury, particularly Jason, Scott, and Debbie, were very bitter at Aubrey. And long-lost juror Neil, who went out for a pack of smokes one day and never came home, was extremely bitter at Michelle. In fact, without Neil on the jury to champion her, Aubrey might have been drawing dead at Final Tribal Council before she even walked in the door. But why? 1. Julia and Scott viewed her as wishy-washy from the Peter vote onwards, where she voted for Julia, then crossed out her name and wrote Peter, and she was never really able to shake her reputation, deserve it or not, as a skittish and indecisive player. There are apparently no take-backsies in Survivor. 2. Aubrey hid her game well. In the edit, we saw a full picture of Aubrey's great game, but in her time actually on the island, she kept the amount of control and agency she had well hidden from her fellow competitors, a little too well hidden. And 3. Debbie was understandably frustrated at Aubrey for voting her out. On the early days of Brain Beach, Debbie comforted Aubrey in a manner she viewed as outside of the game, and Aubrey repaid her by voting her out weeks later in a move Debbie saw as toothless. It's the Brenda and Dawn scenario all over again. Here's a lesson for future survivors. If you're going to accept comfort from other players in a manner that could be construed as, quote, outside of the game, have the good sense to vote them off pre-jury. Perhaps the most bitter juror is Scott, though. Scott would definitely be in the championship for most bitter jurors ever, and this time he's not just on the bench. His jury speech is one of the saltiest of all time, and he tries to paint Aubrey's game as getting weaker over time, when if anything, she peaked later. Michelle certainly earned her win, the jury respected her game and just plain liked her as a person more, and this vote, where Michelle gets 5 votes to Aubrey's 2, is proof yet again that Survivor is above all else a social game. When 3 of 7 jurors just plain do not like you, you're in trouble. Nevertheless, Michelle also had her haters, particularly Neil, who she actually was able to remove from the jury with a late game advantage, sparing us what undoubtedly would have been the worst Eric Cardona-style stump speech ever.
You came to this game thinking you're a badass bitch, but you're more like a cute little puppy. You're still suckling at the teat, and I don't think you stand a chance.
Can you talk about licking teats a little further back? At number 4 is the jury in Survivor Gabon. Yeah, I'd be bitter too if I had to give $1 million to Bob, Susie, or Sugar. It's no secret that this was a particularly uninspiring Final 3, made even worse by the fact that Bob and Susie repeatedly fumble their answers and all but admit that they played horrible, agency-lacking, luck-based games at Final Tribal Council. I'm not saying they should lie about their accomplishments, but they should at least claim some accomplishments. Juries don't like feeling like they lost to the survivor equivalent of Luigi in that Mario Party gif. Regardless, most of this jury was at an average level of bitterness. The members of Kaôh were bitter towards Susie, the members of Fong were bitter towards Bob. But for most of Tribal Council, the temperature doesn't rise above, like, a 6. Most of the vitriol is saved for Sugar, the woman whose whims unequivocally drove the strategy of the game the entire post-merge. The epitome of chaotic good, emphasis on chaotic. You either had to play with or play around Sugar, and she was so unpredictable that it was wiser to just roll with whatever she wanted to do, lest she impulsively shift the target to you. Now, me personally, I would have voted for Chaos, but Sugar was a no-vote finalist before she walked into Final Tribal Council, and no one on this cast wanted Sugar to win, particularly Corinne.
You are an unemployed, uneducated leech on society. And the only thing I would vote to give you is a handful of antidepressants so that no one else has to be subjected to your constant crying anymore. And maybe if you got some, then it would seem a little more sincere when you are crying about your dead father.
Something tells me they didn't hang out after this season. While the rest of the jury was half-heartedly roasting one person or the other depending on which alliance they were in, there's only one man who hated all three: Randy. The only person who Randy hates more than Bob is Susie, and the only person he hates more than Susie is Sugar. These may be his 3 least favorite people in the entire world. He practically begs Bob to spit out a half-competent answer to why he helped Sugar trick him into using a fake idol, just so he doesn't have to vote Susie. The votes ultimately come down along alliance lines. Randy reluctantly votes for Bob, and Bob wins. Overall, this jury wasn't as collectively bitter as some, but the salt levels from Corinne and Randy alone vault this into the top 5. Rarely do things get so personal at Final Tribal. Okay, never do things get so personal at Final Tribal, unless Corinne is present.
Thank you, everyone.
At number 3 is the jury in Survivor Fiji. This jury is one of the nastiest of all time. They really laid into all 3 finalists, including universally beloved Earl, for no good reason. Can't imagine why. Everyone in this room knew that Earl had already won the game, and that Final Tribal was just a formality at this point. So the jury used their bully pulpit to bully. I've kind of always chalked this jury's bitterness up to the fact that all of them were recruited by casting and none of them applied, but surely they'd seen Survivor before, right? You know, this is a game about betrayal. The jury was mad at the finalists for different reasons. For Dreams, the members of his former alliance, whom he flipped on at the merge, aggressively wanted answers about why he betrayed them, and the members of his new alliance wanted answers on why he went back on his deal with Yao Man. Accusations of poor character abound, particularly from Alex, who accuses him of being a poor role model, and Boo, who accuses him of being a poor Christian. For Cassandra, they wanted to know what she did at all, and also to check out her shoes. Those are pretty cool. For Earl, they wanted to know why he voted out Yao Man at Final 4, which, I mean, we're kind of grasping at straws for reasons to be mad at Earl on this one. It's okay for the jury to have questions and even to be angry, but the manner in which this jury conducted themselves is inappropriate. The aggressive interrupting and raising your voice doesn't make you look cool, it just makes you look like a sore, power-tripping loser. Nice tucked-in polo, dick, is what I would say if I were being as mean as Alex. But I'm not. It looks nice. The worst, though, has to be Lisi, who does eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and asks the most condescending jury question of all time to Dreams, asking him how many zeros are in a million. Answer: about as many days as you lasted in the game. The jury ends up unanimously awarding the win to Earl, an expected result, but a good one. But the venom from this jury was shocking and unexpected, especially when directed at Earl. I mean, imagine being mad at Earl. Many of this jury felt themselves above the finalists and sought to humiliate and harm them, rather than use their question to inform their decision on who to vote for. I'm just saying that energy could have been better spent elsewhere, like finding a better outfit. At number 2 are the juries in Survivor Samoa and Survivor Heroes vs. Villains. You cannot talk about bitter juries without talking about Russell Hantz. He made this his whole brand. For a long time, Russell believed that the game of Survivor was flawed because he lost in back-to-back final tribal councils, and argued instead that the jurors he faced couldn't and shouldn't trust their own eyes, and that instead, America should get a percentage of the vote. The same America that voted Jane fan favorite in Survivor Nicaragua? That America? Russell's since come around, done some self-reflection, and has accepted how and why he lost to Natalie and Sandra. But he was onto something originally. His losses were in large part due to extreme bitterness on the part of the 18 jurors he faced. Question is, what is it about Russell that brings out the bitterness in people? Is it the needless cruelty? I think some of the jurors in Samoa wanted to vote for Russell. Natalie played a great game and was well liked, but Russell was undeniably the main strategic force in the Foa 4. If Russell still played just as hard but just treated the members of Kaôh with respect, I don't know, he's probably a Survivor winner, or at least gets more than 2 votes. But the jury was simply not buying what he was selling, which was the argument that he's a completely different guy outside of the game, and that his entire, sometimes nasty personality was simply gameplay. If Russell had a shot in Samoa, he had no shot in Heroes vs. Villains. The heroes hated him, and Parvati by association. I think JT in his question puts it very well to Russell. The strategy of the game is to get to the end, then get votes. Russell's only good at the first half. Candace similarly heroically sums things up. Sandra and Parvati told lies, but Russell told nasty lies he didn't need to tell. Juror after juror roasts Russell for his lack of jury management, putting Russell on defense where he doubles down on his bad behavior, leading to further juror frustrations. In both cases, Russell lost, and the woman he underestimated most won. It wasn't just Russell that caught heat from these juries either. Mick in Samoa and Parvati in Heroes vs. Villains were both lambasted as well. Parvati for her association and alliance with Russell, and Mick, well, Shambo did more to raise awareness of the word feckless than anyone else in the history of the world when she described Mick's gameplay as such.
Feckless.
Feckless.
But it was Russell that these 2 juries were truly bitter at, and it's not just sour grapes over getting bested strategically. It's just not a good idea to call a juror whose vote you'll want in like 8 days a dumbass. The most bitter jury of all time is the jury in Survivor All-Stars, and it's not close. I don't think anyone's had such an unpleasant time facing the jury as Amber and Rob did. This jury didn't want to vote for either of them, but there was particular venom for Rob. In one corner are the Mogo Mogos, who spared Amber at the swap on the promise that Rob and Amber would work with them at the merge, only for Rob and Amber to go back on that promise and vote Lex, Kathy, and Sheehan out. In the other corner, the members of Romber's original tribe Shapera, who were all convinced that they were going to Final 4, if not Final 2, together with Rob, only for Rob to vote them out and take Jenna and Rupert to Final 4 instead. The tone of the jury is set by Lex, who gives the first speech, roasting Rob for selling out his real-life friend, him, for a stack of greenbacks. Lex tries to position himself as the real winner because he didn't sell out his values or his character for this game. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is all extremely rich coming from Lex, who did the exact same thing Rob did to him to his real-life friends, Colby and Ethan. And Sheehan would later caution the jury, with some big ol' side-eye at Lex, that people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Aside from Lex, both Alicia and Big Tom really dig in. Alicia calls the games Rob and Amber played unethical and a negative reflection of their character, and Big Tom fakes being cool with Rob, then goes to shake his hand, only to pull it away. Definitely a cool and mature thing for a man in his late 40s to do. The All-Stars jury is unlike any other jury in Survivor history. The Survivor community was small at this point. Only a little over 100 people had played the game, and many players, even across seasons, were extremely close as friends outside of it. I know it sounds silly in the age of influencers where everyone and their mother has their own reality show, but back in the day, this was a shared, sometimes traumatic experience that only this small group of people could truly understand. It makes sense that they'd seek each other out and form a tight-knit community. And we're talking tight-knit. I mean, Ethan alone dated like 30 women from the first 7 seasons. Get it, dude.
That big? Yeah.
That made this inaugural returning player season tricky because real friendships were on the line. Whereas future returnee seasons would shy away from this meta talk, in All-Stars the conversation was unavoidable because this community was so close in real life. In the end, the jury awards Amber the win, Rob proposes at the live finale, and they lived happily ever after with enough kids to get their own TLC show if they wanted it, so the jury heat was probably worth it. This jury is and always will be the most bitter of all time because the context that could lead to this level of bitterness was ephemeral. It will never exist again, and only in 2004, at the dawn of the reality TV era, did we watch a middle-aged man go yoink and be like, ooh, he got him. Got nothing else for ya. To help me get that stack of greenbacks Lex was talking about, like and subscribe and I'll get you more Survivor content just like this. Until next time, don't get idled out.